Hello, and welcome to the Red Bank Humanists podcast. Each month, Red Bank Humanists hosts a public forum featuring speakers and topics covering a wide range of subjects of special interest to the humanist community. To learn more, including information about our monthly book club and our Drinking Post-Theologically events, visit redbankhumanists.org and follow us on Twitter at Red Bank Humanists. So now we begin. Here are the elements of my talk. Music accompanied by what is creativity? You'll read some quotes about creativity. We'll answer the question, what is the source of human creativity? What interferes with creativity? How we can nurture our creativity? How creativity can give meaning to life? And we'll end up with a prayer by Kurt Vonnegut. What is creativity? Well, we'll start with the definition from the dictionary. Creativity is the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, methods, interpretations, etc. Originality, progressiveness, or imagination. The need for creativity in modern industry, creativity in the performing arts. The ability to transcend traditional ideas, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, methods, interpretations, originality, progressiveness, or imagination. Progressiveness. I never thought of that word as part of a definition of creativity. Interesting word. Progressive. Progressive is a key word in our definition of humanism. Humanism is a progressive philosophy of life that, without theism and other supernatural beliefs, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good of humanity. That's such a noble statement. I love it. I don't know that I've ever gotten there, but boy, it gets you going as a goal, you know. So, if creative is synonymous with progressive, we humanists have creativity embedded in us. We have license to be as creative as we want. We actually have a mandate to be creative. In fact, it says right in our affirmations of humanism, our statement of principles, we believe in enjoying life here and now and developing our creative talents to their fullest. We are engaged in the arts no less than by the sciences. I love that statement, although I must add here that the sciences are no less creative than the arts. Scientists are surely creative. The end of that dictionary definition of creativity ended with, there's a need for creativity in modern industry. All I could say to that was, oh, okay. And then it pointed out that there's a need for creativity in the performing arts. Well, that's a no-brainer. Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's leaving out the most important application. It should go on to say that creativity is an essential part of being human. It's part of what drives us. We need to use our creativity in pursuit of all that's good in life. We need to use creativity to flourish. We use it when we help other people, when we try to make peace, when we have to teach our children not to text while driving, when you cook a fabulous meal, and very important, when we want to express our love to someone. That's being creative. Let's face it, you use your creativity 100 times a day. getting to work, solving problems, getting out of that lunch date with the boring guy at the office. We figure out all kinds of things. Like what? Like what? Well, you answer some of these. Anybody? How did you use creativity in the last week? And I don't know that we need to pass the microphone on this one, but anybody, just raise your hand. What did you do?
I connected with an old boyfriend who was in the service, and I wrote to him when he was in the service. He was 93, and he and his wife and I are going to lunch.
Wow. Well, and that must be the guy that you talk about in the video. No? The guy that your husband, soon husband, didn't want you to write to? This was on a great tape that we made where she talked about her life. Anybody else? Come on. What did you do? Come on, Cliselle. You did something creative. You're a creative guy.
Well, yesterday I officiated my own daughter's wedding.
Huh. Oh. Now, did she or they pick what they wanted, or did you get creative and suggest some things?
I always ask the couple to write to me about their lives, about what they met, what about each other's stories, and I put it together. And it ended up being, there was such a strong thread there about how dance brought them together, brought them back together when they had split apart. And in fact, my son-in-law...
Can you hear this? Okay.
My son-in-law wrote that he knows he's sort of a fact-based guy. My daughter's a more creative person. So he said he hoped his children... Yeah, he knew his children were going to be rational and punctual artists who knew how to dance.
And I assume there was great dancing at this wedding.
It's still going on now.
That's great. Anybody else? What did you do? Come on, you did something creative. Did you make something? Did you sing something? Yes.
My grandson is in Hollywood to be a movie star. And there are cousins there, and he visits them, and he called me up and he said, Nanny, nobody knows anything about the family. And, of course, who else to ask but me? So I wrote him a couple of composition pages, and he called me and he said, Nanny, write some more. And so the last one I sent him is How I Met Your Grandfather, because there is a TV program called How I Met Your Mother. And I'm waiting for his reaction to that. Okay.
Well, it's funny. When you get to a certain age, all of a sudden, you want to know more about the family. And I did this. I went, I don't know, in the, what year was it? Maybe 89 or 1990. I went to San Diego and interviewed my uncle, the famous writer in our family. He was a scientist in the Navy, and he wrote Western novels, and so this was a big deal. He was the star of the family. And so I went and interviewed him and asked him all kinds of questions about who was what religion, and tried to dig back. And you find out all kinds of funny things. The one line I remember is about a character. Her name was Auntie, and everybody just called her Auntie. And I think it was my grandfather's sister. And my uncle, when questioned about her, as I was going through the family tree, right, what do you know about this one? What do you know about that one? The answer was, she smoked. And she'd lie if the truth sounded better. Anyway, that's great that you're there to field the questions, because now he's got it in him. He's got that interest in understanding his family and where he came from and who some of those ghosty people back there were. Anybody else? What'd you do, Tim?
I had to fix a broken toilet yesterday.
Yeah.
Very late in the day, and part of that toilet, the tank, has a 4-inch nut. And, you know, who has a wrench? None of my neighbors did. Who has a wrench to, like, unscrew a 4-inch nut, right? And it was too late to go to Lowe's and so on. And so I tried all these different things, like I tried a C-clamp, you know, to try and everything slipped off. I finally got so mad at this nut. Luckily, it was a big plastic nut, right? I said, okay, damn it, nut. I'm going to take a hacksaw. And I sawed the damn thing and, you know, sawed it off and then chiseled it off. So I finally got it off. But I never thought I could use a hacksaw to unscrew a nut.
Ah, well, you're an engineer, see. Not a plumbing engineer, but you are now. All right, let's move on. I want to explore quotes. I love quotes. If you've been around in the past, you know I wallow around in quotes. Always have. Back when I was 14, I had this paperback version of the best quotations for all occasions, which I still have, with this dilapidated, dissolved rubber band around the book holding the pages together. And I had typed up on separate sheets of paper and stuck them in there, my favorite ones. I especially liked this book because the quotes were organized by topic: sex, religion, hypocrisy, all things on my mind at the time. This was my first introduction to philosophy and lots of famous people who had such great, smart, pithy things to say. The quotes in the religion section supported my growing adolescent disbelief and gave me insight into the thoughts of the great people such as Robert Greene Ingersoll, the great agnostic. His quote, which was highlighted there, and it's still there, the inspiration of the Bible depends upon the ignorance of the gentleman who reads it. I didn't really learn about Ingersoll until 40 years later, when he then became a real hero to me. And the Thomas Paine quote I liked: "The world is my country, all mankind are my brethren, and to do good is my religion." I love seeing that. And I guess we have a Paine expert coming, right? And I don't mean like the pain that I'm in. A Thomas Paine expert coming in next month. Isn't that right? Yeah, okay. And, of course, I looked up quotes about acting because I was interested in that. And this one by Anton Chekhov struck me as what it might be for me in the future when I became famous. When an actor has money, he doesn't send letters, but telegrams. Okay, so here's what. I'd like to pass these out. You're getting pressed into service, aren't you? I am. Yeah, okay. Pass those out, and anybody, we're just going to read. We each read one. You know, if you don't want to hand it to the person next to you, but we want to start going through this. And so I'm going to give you, there are as many sheets as there are quotes. So, you know, there aren't enough for everybody. We can switch them around. And let's get the mic. And Herb, you want to read one for us? We're getting you the mic here.
The idea flow from the human spirit is absolutely unlimited. All you have to do is tap into that well. I don't like to use the word efficiency. It's creativity. It's a belief that every person counts.
And it's very interesting. That's from Jack Welch.
That surprises me.
Yeah, well, he was the head of GE.
Yes.
Yeah, and it gives a statistic there, but that's really not important.
Right.
Let's have another one. Who wants to do number 2? Here's a hand. Here's a hand. Right there. Doris.
I like creativity is the sudden cessation of stupidity. Edwin Land.
Is that the second one or just one you picked? Okay, so we don't want to duplicate it. Here's a hand.
I like this one by Maya Angelou. You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have.
That's great. It's true. It's true. You get started and you get on a roll and you get in the zone. It just keeps coming. Okay? Anybody else? There's a hand over there.
Pablo Picasso said, "The chief enemy of creativity is good sense."
Yes. Anybody else? Don't be shy now. We have a microphone. You don't have to stand up and speak loudly. If you don't want to do one, pass it on to somebody else. Maybe they'll want to do one.
Yeah, this is by Steve Jobs. Creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it. They just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. That's because they were able to connect experiences they've had and synthesize new things. It's Steve Jobs.
He certainly did that. Okay. Got a bunch of chickens here. Oh, she's got one over here. Oh.
Okay, don't think. Thinking is the enemy of creativity. It's self-conscious, and anything self-conscious is lousy. You can't try to do things. You simply must do things. And that's Ray Bradbury.
Oh, yeah. That is so true. You just, like we were just saying, once you get started, it starts to roll. Yeah?
Sorry, let me just see what we have here.
There's stuff on the back, too.
Yes. Creativity is what helps me escape a lot of my inner demons. That's Demi Lovato. She's an actress and a singer, I think a songwriter.
For her, it's an escape. To me, it's going to some great place when you're in the creative swing of things. Anybody else? There's one.
Every once in a while, I think about the time when I was inspired to write and didn't have any paper. And I went pretty crazy until I found someone who would give me a pad. And over a period of a weekend with other activities going on, I filled that pad. And I just always remember that feeling. And now, right this moment in my car, there is a pad and an ink pen if that ever happens to me again.
All right. I had one here I just had to throw in. It wasn't on the list. You can't fake creativity, competence, or sexual arousal. Douglas Coupland, a Canadian novelist. Okay. All right. Let's move on. What is the source of human creativity? I'm not really sure what the source of human creativity is, except to say that there's a controversy here. There's two main camps of thought. To quote Julia Cameron, author of The Artist's Way, the best and most popular self-help book, really, helping you to find and remove those things that block your artistic, creativity. Quote, our creative dreams and longings do come from a divine source, not from the human ego. Now, you've heard this line. Oh, he has such wonderful God-given talents. I've written a whole piece on that on my blog, Bull. Just don't get me going on that. Especially like when somebody is, they come from a family, a long line of people, and all those genes go into your makeup, and maybe you have some of those leanings or tendencies within you, and then you practice like hell doing what you're doing, if it's a violinist or a painter, or, and people want to call it a God-given talent. And we'll get a little bit more into this. Although, I have to admit, I spent 6 months doing the exercises in her book daily and found it very helpful. I do not buy, however, that my creativity is divinely inspired. And yet, although I believe our creativity summons the inner workings of our minds and hearts in mysterious ways, there's no way to actually confirm the source of human creativity with the precise tools of science. We can't do that. I can't prove it. I think it's a pretty safe assumption that the source of human creativity is the human. We'll have more on that in a minute. Any comments about that? Tim?
I just think sometime, I don't know if it's going to take 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, right? But we will begin to know enough about the brain to know why. I think we've all had this experience. Like some people are naturally more creative than others for some reason. Probably for the same reason that, some people are better musicians than others. And we don't understand the source of creativity now, but I think science will eventually show us where it comes from and how to enhance it.
That'll be interesting, yeah.
Just some stats on the music angle. The current research indicates that to become proficient on an instrument or any art takes 10,000 hours. That's about 10 years of doing it. So, yeah, that's God-given, right? And if you do something wrong for 10 years, you're going to get really, really good at doing it wrong. So.
Okay. Now, there is some science on creativity, and I have it now. We can begin. Would you kill the lights over there? Basically, this test that Dr. Elad Segev ran was on 7th graders. And what he did was he had a little matchbox with some matches, little wood matches, and then he had a cookie thing that you could eat. And he gave them the instructions that we're going to sprinkle something over this cookie in a minute, and you need to find a way to protect the cookie. We don't want any of this sawdust or whatever we're sprinkling. We don't want that on the cookie. So they set about doing it, and it took them a few minutes. And are we getting it? The next one. Okay. So what happened is he changed the rules. He told them that it needed to be protected, but he didn't say that they needed to use the max box or the matches, or I think there was one other thing on the table. And he thought, this is going to take longer. In about 10 seconds, this girl put her hand over the cookie said, will that work? So he went, yeah, great. So then he pointed out that they didn't use any of the resources that he had. When they didn't have those rules, they did their own thing. They went outside of the box. And so then they did it, the last one, he looked over and he was looking at this guy's table there, and there was no cookie there. And he said, what happened to the cookie? He said, I ate it. Nothing's going to get on it now. But there were several other insights in this experiment, but it was very interesting how they responded. You must give yourselves complete freedom. This is the lesson. Complete freedom to begin, complete freedom to create what it is you want to create, the freedom to create when you are finished, even the freedom to quit the project if necessary, without equating quitting with failure. Remember, in creativity, there is no such thing as a mistake. You must create an environment in which to work as well. That gives you the freedom to create. If you have a nice space, you put together your work area, you get rid of all of the distractions. A lot of people try to work in terrible situations, a terrible space, and they can't get it done. All right, what interferes with creativity? We do. What is it specifically that interferes with our creativity? What? What is it? It is fear. The first lesson in creativity is learning that in creativity, there's no such thing as a mistake, and yet we live in dread fear that if we make a mistake, it will be on our record forever, for all to see. We fear that we'll make a mistake and we will somehow look like a fool. I always tell the story of my first acting class in high school. And to this day, that teacher, that director, was one of the best, most professional directors I've ever had. And he said, you cannot, if you're going to be an actor, you cannot be afraid to make a fool of yourself. You have to jump in and let it go. Let it go. You have to jump in and you can't be concerned. And what happens is you might be wrong. And the director might go, oh, that's terrible. Here's what that scene is really about. And you go, ooh, okay, let me jump in and do that. But you learn from it. And so it's a very important thing. All right. Let's go. This is a wonderful video. I hope to shout this one works. It's been seen over 8 million times. I don't know if you've seen it, but Elizabeth Gilbert.
But it's more than that, of course. It is also my great lifelong love and fascination. And I don't expect that that's ever going to change. But that said, something kind of peculiar has happened recently in my life and in my career, which has caused me to have to sort of recalibrate my whole relationship with this work. And the peculiar thing is that I recently wrote this book, this memoir called Eat, Pray, Love, which decidedly unlike any of my previous books, went out in the world for some reason and became this big mega sensation, international bestseller thing, the result of which is that everywhere I go now, people treat me like I'm doomed. Seriously, doomed. Like, they come up to me now like all worried and they say, aren't you afraid you're never going to be able to top that? Aren't you afraid you're going to keep writing for your whole life and you're never again going to create a book that anybody in the world cares about at all, ever again? So that's reassuring, you know. But it would be worse, except for that I happen to remember that over 20 years ago, when I first started telling people when I was a teenager that I wanted to be a writer, I was met with this same kind of sort of fear-based reaction, and people would say, aren't you afraid you're never going to have any success? Aren't you afraid the humiliation of rejection will kill you? Aren't you afraid that you're going to work your whole life at this craft and nothing's ever going to come of it and you're going to die on a scrap heap of broken dreams with your mouth filled with bitter ash of failure? Like that, you know? And the short answer to all those questions is yes. Yes, I'm afraid of all those things. And I always have been, and I'm afraid of many, many more things besides that, you know, people can't even guess at, like seaweed and other things that are scary. But when it comes to writing, the thing that I've been sort of thinking about lately and wondering about lately is why, you know? Is it rational? Is it logical that anybody should be expected to be afraid of the work that they feel they were put on this earth to do, you know? And what is it specifically about creative ventures that seems to make us really nervous about each other's mental health in a way that other careers kind of don't do, you know? Like my dad, for example, was a chemical engineer, and I don't recall once in his 40 years of chemical engineering anybody asking him if he was afraid to be a chemical engineer, you know? It just didn't come, like, got chemical engineering block, John, you know, how's it going? And it just didn't come up like that, you know? But to be fair, right, chemical engineers as a group, you know, haven't really earned a reputation over the centuries for being alcoholic manic depressives. And we writers, you know, we kind of do have that reputation. And not just writers, but creative people across all genres, it seems, have this reputation for being enormously mentally unstable. And, you know, all you have to do is look at the very grim death count in the 20th century alone of really magnificent creative minds who died young and often at their own hands, you know. And even the ones who didn't literally commit suicide seem to be really undone by their gifts, you know. Norman Mailer, just before he died, last interview, he said, "Every one of my books has killed me a little more." An extraordinary statement to make about your life's work, you know, but we don't even blink when we hear somebody say this because we've heard that kind of stuff for so long, and somehow we've completely internalized and accepted collectively this notion that creativity and suffering are somehow inherently linked, and that artistry in the end will always ultimately lead to anguish. And the question that I want to ask everybody here today is, are you guys all cool with that idea? Like, are you comfortable with that? Because you look at it even from an inch away, and, you know, I'm not at all comfortable with that assumption. I think it's odious, and I also think it's dangerous, and I don't want to see it perpetuated into the next century. I think better if we encourage, you know, our great creative minds to live, you know, and I definitely know that in my case, in my situation, it would be very dangerous for me to start sort of leaking down that dark path of assumption, you know, particularly given the circumstance that I'm in right now in my career, which is, you know, like, check it out. I'm pretty young. I'm only about 40 years old. I still have maybe another 4 decades of work left in me. And it's exceedingly likely that anything I write from this point forward is going to be judged by the world as the work that came after the freakish success of my last book, right? I should just put it bluntly, because we're all sort of friends here now. It's exceedingly likely that my greatest success is behind me, you know. So Jesus, what a thought, you know, like, that's the kind of thought that could lead a person to start drinking gin at 9 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, I don't want to go there. You know, I would prefer to keep doing this work that I love. And so the question becomes how, you know, and so it seems to me, upon a lot of reflection, that the way that I have to work now in order to continue writing is that I have to create some sort of protective psychological construct, right? I have to sort of find some way to have a safe distance, between me as I am writing and my very natural anxiety about what the reaction to that writing is going to be from now on. And as I've been looking over the last year for like models for how to do that, I've been sort of looking across time, and I've been trying to find like other societies to see if they might have had better and saner ideas than we have about how to help creative people sort of manage the inherent emotional risks of creativity. And that search has led me to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So stay with me, because it does circle around back. But ancient Greece and ancient Rome, people did not happen to believe that creativity came from human beings back then, okay? People believed that creativity was this divine attendant spirit that came to human beings from some distant and unknowable source for distant and unknowable reasons. The Greeks famously called these divine attendant spirits of creativity daemons. Socrates famously believed that he had a daemon who spoke wisdom to him from afar. The Romans had the same idea, but they called that sort of disembodied creative spirit a genius, which is great, because the Romans did not actually think that a genius was a particularly clever individual. They believed that a genius was this sort of magical divine entity who was believed to literally live in the walls of an artist's studio, kind of like Dobby, the house elf, and who would come out and sort of invisibly assist the artist with their work and would shape the outcome of that work. So brilliant. There it is, right there, that distance that I'm talking about, that psychological construct to protect you from the results of your work, And everyone knew that this is how it functioned, right? So the ancient artist was protected from certain things like, for example, too much narcissism, right? If your work was brilliant, couldn't take all the credit for it. Everybody knew you had this like disembodied genius who had helped you. If your work bombed, not entirely your fault, Everyone knew your genius was kind of lame. And this is how people thought about creativity in the West for a really long time. And then the Renaissance came and everything changed, and we had this big idea, and the big idea was, let's put the individual human being at the center of the universe, right? Above all gods and mysteries, and there's no more room for like mystical creatures who take dictation from the divine. And it's the beginning of rational humanism, and people started to believe that creativity came completely from the self of the individual. And for the first time in history, you start to hear people referring to this or that artist as being a genius rather than having a genius. And I got to tell you, I think that was a huge error. I think that allowing somebody, like one mere person, to believe that he or she is like the vessel, like the font and the essence and the source of all divine, creative, unknowable, eternal mystery is just like a smidge too much responsibility to put on one fragile human psyche. It's like asking somebody to swallow the sun. It just completely warps and distorts egos, and it creates all these unmanageable expectations about performance. And I think the pressure of that has been killing off our artists for the last 500 years. And if this is true, and I think it is true, the question becomes, what now? Can we do this differently? Maybe go back to some more ancient understanding about the relationship between humans and the creative mystery. Maybe not. Maybe we can't just erase 500 years of rational humanistic thought in one 18-minute speech. And there's probably people in this audience who would raise really legitimate scientific suspicions about the notion of basically fairies who follow people around rubbing fairy juice on their projects and stuff. I'm not probably going to bring you all along with me on this. But the question that I kind of want to pose is, why not? Why not think about it this way? Because it makes as much sense as anything else I have ever heard in terms of explaining the utter maddening capriciousness of the creative process, a process which, as anybody who has ever tried to make something, which is to say, as basically everyone here knows, does not always behave rationally, and in fact can sometimes feel downright paranormal. I had this encounter recently where I met the extraordinary American poet Ruth Stone, who's now in her 90s, but she's been a poet her entire life, and she told me that when she was growing up in rural Virginia. She would be out working in the fields, and she said she would like feel and hear a poem coming at her from over the landscape. And she said it was like a thunderous train of air, and it would come barreling down at her over the landscape. And when she felt it coming, because it would like shake the earth under her feet, she knew that she had only one thing to do at that point, and that was to, in her words, run like hell. And she would like run like hell to the house, and she'd be getting chased by this poem. And the whole deal was that she had to get to a piece of paper and a pencil fast enough so that when it thundered through her, she could collect it and grab it on the page. And other times she wouldn't be fast enough, so she'd be like running and running and running, and she wouldn't get to the house, and the poem would like barrel through her, and she would miss it. And she said it would continue on across the landscape, looking, as she put it, for another poet. And then there were these times. This is the piece I never forgot. She said that there were moments when she would almost miss it, right? So she's like running into the house and she's looking for the paper, and the poem passes through her, and she grabs a pencil just as it's going through her, and then she said it was like she would reach out with her other hand and she would catch it. She would catch the poem by its tail, and she would pull it backwards into her body as she was transcribing on the page. And in these instances, the poem would come up on the page perfect and intact, but backwards from the last word to the first. So when I heard that, I was like, that's uncanny. That's exactly what my creative process is like. It's not at all what my creative process, I'm not the pipeline, like I'm a mule, and the way that I have to work is that I have to get up at the same time every day and like sweat and labor and like barrel through it really awkwardly. But even I, in my mulishness, even I have brushed up against that thing, at times. And I would imagine that a lot of you have too. Like even I have had work or ideas come through me from a source that I honestly cannot identify. And what is that thing? And how are we to relate to it in a way that will not make us lose our minds, but in fact might actually keep us sane? And for me, the best contemporary example that I have of how to do that is the musician Tom Waits, who I got to interview several years ago on a magazine assignment. And we were talking about this. And, Tom, for most of his life, he was pretty much the embodiment of the tormented contemporary modern artist, like trying to control and manage and dominate these sort of uncontrollable creative impulses, that were totally internalized. But then he got older and he got calmer. And one day he was driving down the freeway in Los Angeles, he told me, and this is when it all changed for him. And he's like speeding along, and all of a sudden he hears this little fragment of melody, that comes into his head, as inspiration often comes, elusive and tantalizing, and he wants it, it's gorgeous, and he longs for it, but he has no way to get it. He doesn't have a piece of paper, he doesn't have a pencil, he doesn't have a tape recorder, so he starts to feel all that old anxiety start to rise in him, like, I'm going to lose this thing, and then I'm going to be haunted by this song forever, and I'm not good enough, and I can't do it. And instead of panicking, he just stopped that whole mental process, and he did something completely novel. He just looked up at the sky and he said, "Excuse me, can you not see that I'm driving? Do I look like I can write down a song right now? If you really want to exist, come back at a more opportune moment when I can take care of you. Otherwise, go bother somebody else today. Go bother Leonard Cohen, And his whole work process changed after that. Not the work. The work was still oftentimes as dark as ever, But the process and the heavy anxiety around it was released when he took the genius out of him where it was causing nothing but trouble, and released it kind of back where it came from, and realized that this didn't have to be this internalized, tormented thing. It could be this peculiar, wondrous, bizarre collaboration, kind of conversation between Tom and the strange external thing that was not quite Tom. So when I heard that story, it started to shift a little bit the way that I worked too, and it already saved me once, this idea. It saved me when I was in the middle of writing Eat, Pray, Love, and I fell into one of those sort of pits of despair that we all fall into when we're working on something and it's not coming, and you start to think this is going to be a disaster, this is going to be the worst book ever written, not just bad, but the worst book ever written. And I started to think I should just dump this project, But then I remembered Tom talking to the open air, and I tried it. So I just lifted my face up from the manuscript and I directed my comments to an empty corner of the room, and I said aloud, "Listen, you thing, you and I both know that if this book isn't brilliant, that is not entirely my fault, right? Because you can see that I am putting everything I have into this. You know, I don't have any more than this. So if you want it to be better, then you got to show up and do your part of the deal, okay? But if you don't do that, you know what? The hell with it. I'm going to keep writing anyway because that's my job. And I would please like the record to reflect today that I showed up for my part of the job. Because, thank you. In the end, it's like this, okay? Centuries ago in the deserts of North Africa, people used to gather for these moonlight dances of sacred dance and music that would go on for hours and hours until dawn. And they were always magnificent because the dancers were professionals and they were terrific, right? But every once in a while, very rarely, something would happen and one of these performers would actually become transcendent. And I know you know what I'm talking about because I know you've all seen at some point in your life a performance like this, you know? And it was like time would stop and the dancer would sort of step through some kind of portal, and he wasn't doing anything different than he had ever done, you know, 1,000 nights before, but everything would align, and all of a sudden he would no longer appear to be merely human. You know, he would be like lit from within and lit from below, and all like lit up on fire with divinity. And when this happened back then, people knew it for what it was, you know, they called it by its name. They would put their hands together and they would start to chant, Allah, 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 God, God, God. That's God, you know. Curious historical footnote. When the Moors invaded southern Spain, they took this custom with them, and the pronunciation changed over the centuries from Allah, Allah, Allah to Ole, 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 which you still hear in bullfights and in flamenco dances in Spain when a performer has done something impossible and magic. Allah, Ole, Ole, Allah, magnificent, bravo, incomprehensible, there it is, a glimpse of God. Which is great, because we need that. But the tricky bit comes the next morning, right, for the dancer himself, when he wakes up and discovers that it's Tuesday at 11 a.m. and he's no longer a glimpse of God. He's just an aging mortal with really bad knees, and you know, maybe he's never going to ascend to that height again, and maybe nobody will ever chant God's name again as he spins, and what is he then to do with the rest of his life? This is hard. This is one of the most painful reconciliations to make in a creative life, you know? But maybe it doesn't have to be quite so full of anguish if you never happened to believe in the first place that the most extraordinary aspects of your being came from you. But maybe if you just believed that they were on loan to you, you know, from some unimaginable source for some exquisite portion of your life to be passed along when you're finished with somebody else. And, you know, if we think about it this way, it starts to change everything. You know, this is how I've started to think, and this is certainly how I was thinking about it in the last few months, you know, as I've been working on the book that will soon be published as the dangerously, frighteningly over-anticipated follow-up to my freakish success. And what I have to sort of keep telling myself when I get really psyched out about that is don't be afraid. Don't be daunted. Just do your job. Continue to show up for your piece of it, whatever that might be. If your job is to dance, do your dance. If the divine, cockeyed genius assigned to your case decides to let some sort of wonderment be glimpsed for just one moment through your efforts, then ole. And if not, do your dance anyhow. And ole to you nonetheless. I believe this and I feel like we must teach it. Ole to you nonetheless, just for having the sheer human love and stubbornness to keep showing up. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, all the things she spoke about, the magic and the weirdness that goes on and the way things come to you. I mean, I think there's creativity. Here's one of her quotes. Creativity doesn't care at all about results. The only thing it craves is the process. Learn to love the process and let whatever happens happen next without fussing too much over it. Work like a monk or a mule or some other representative metaphor for diligence. Love the work. Life will do with it. Life will do what it wants with you regardless. So, I think you could hear the exact point in the video when she starts going into the God business. Now, I know a lot of people could say, well, it's terminology. It's terminology, you know. We could replace divine with nature. But I think there's a difference in perception, at least for me. And so, you know, when she got to that point, when I played this the first time, I went, oh, no, she didn't say that, did she? No. And then I got the idea, well, people will pick at the words and what they really mean. But my position still is, even though she has so much insight into writing and creativity, her own creativity, and fighting against fear of what all those people say to you. People can say such terrible things to you that, you know, that it's like a knife, you know. You finish something that's you've been working on for months, and they go, well, didn't you do something like that before? You know, people, they don't edit their comments sometimes. But I still think that there is magic. We don't know where these things come from. You can call it a divine genie. I'm just happy with a genie, if you want to say genie, if you just want to play with that idea. Something is coming from somewhere. Something is coming through you. That's my position. So any observations or comments about this dichotomy within her talk? Oh, I see hands.
I just have a short comment. Is it through you or from you?
There.
I think of it more as coming from you, not
coming from you, not through you. That's great. I like that. That makes sense to me. He had his hand up too.
I consider myself a creative person, but I am not an artist or a writer. The first observation from the scientific standpoint is that there is a lot inside your head that is not your conscious mind, your ego. And anyone who's ever ridden a bicycle knows this. You cannot explain to somebody how to ride a bicycle or why a bicycle will stand up on two wheels. And most people's idea of why it works, they're wrong. People say it's the spin of the wheel. It isn't true. You can stand on a bicycle that's not moving. Be that as it may, the creative process comes through you in one sense, but where it's coming from is still within you. It's just not your ego. It's not that conscious mind. And so I can readily see how people would think of this as a divine inspiration kind of thing. I can also see how this thing can flit right by you. It's happened to me, not like a thunderbolt coming across a field, but that kind of thing has passed me by. And I have a fix for it, by the way. When I had to write technical papers, sometimes it was very important to get the words down right so that you conveyed the meaning. And sometimes I'd be working on it, especially if I were lifting material from other things I'd written, because these were technical materials. It wouldn't come together. I had a mishmash. I would put it away and come back to it, or I would just basically throw it out. I wouldn't throw the papers out. I'd just get them out of hand and come back to it. And what's very interesting is the same thing is true with mathematical problems, even more so. I've solved, for my own purposes, any number of complicated mathematical things, nothing that the world would be interested in, but they were important to me. And every once in a while, I just have to put it all away and start over again. The simple thing of just the notation you use can make the difference between whether you can solve these problems or not. So, yes, something is passing through you, but you are the origin of it. Now, flip side, mysticism. First of all, there very much is such a thing as magic. Magic is the work of the mages, and it's something that you don't understand. How many here can explain to me how a computer works? Some of you probably can. How your watch works, whether it is a geared watch or a These are magic to most people, but we don't regard them as magic because we look at them as commonplace. So, but nonetheless, in the Middle Ages, I understand that clockwork was considered magic. So there is magic in that sense, and people are constantly astounded by this magic, which is fine. I was driving at something else here. 1 second.
Clock is ticking.
Yeah, the clock is ticking. Well, go ahead. I'll come back to it.
I would love to hear the counter argument to this model for creativity and so on. In the same way, okay, hearts pump blood, kidneys process waste. Okay, I think of brains in the current jargon, right? They're a collection of apps. They're just a collection of apps. And some of us have apps that are very good at doing X and others do Y and so on. And I don't understand why we have to resort to saying, oh, that's not from app X in your brain. That came from that corner over there, or that came from the sky. And I don't see what's wrong with that model. We have collections of apps. Some of them often fail, as we've seen in the news in the last week. So anyway, that's one thing. The second thing I just wanted to share is because I've done yoga for like 40 years, and so part of the yoga tradition is reading the Bhagavad Gita, of which I'm scared to even mention in a humanist forum. But this is like, 6,000 years ago, the Gita was saying, and I won't have this exact quote correct, but it's something like, action alone concerns you, never results. And it's kind of what she was saying, in the video is, don't worry about success, just do your job.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I personally don't believe that there's any external influence or external genie in my creativity. It all comes from the squishes and squirts from within my brain. So I don't buy the external influences whatsoever.
There's a hand over there, and one over here.
It does feel like it's coming from nowhere, but I think because like Bruce said, it's bubbling up from your subconscious. In one way, it kind of feels like it's coming through me. If you look at it through time, all the time that you spent on the problem, or practicing something, or getting better at it. That in that way, it's kind of flowing through you, but not. I don't think it's a god or a muse or anything like that. And for me, a lot of times it's just stepping away. You get too caught up in an unsuccessful path, and just take a break. Idea will pop to me in the shower or during a walk.
I just want to say that I just think we're too caught up in maligning, if you want to call it inspiration and creativity, because people for thousands of years had to call it God. Okay, that's one thing. And secondly, as someone from an artist family who can draw and never had to try to draw, not be a great artist, there is something innate. Now, whether it's genetic the way Tim wants to see it, and it's embedded in my genes, etc., but these are things that not everybody has. Certain kinds of creativity other people don't have. She's talking about certain kinds of abstract creativity which are not really necessary for human survival. And so I really do believe that it comes from somewhere, I don't know where. I mean, it may have been embedded inside us, but I like the idea of what she said, because if your whole life is creative, this rational way of blaming the artist, of like Van Gogh or something, that's not a good way to look at it. I liked what she said about how I call it inspiration comes, and you can really be creative.
Yeah, this is the way I think of it. We are not isolated creatures with a single brain and nothing else in the universe around us. One of the things we have to do is be open to everything that's around us, and give ourselves the space and the environment in which those things can have an effect on whatever it is that is in our brain that seizes something, sees the meaning, sees something that's meaningful, and then applies it to a situation. But we have to realize that there's a lot more out there that's different than we are, and that has very important things to offer us. Just as an example, in my daughter's wedding, the concert that brought them back together was a free summer concert in Central Park with the musician Gary Clark Jr. I don't know how many of you know this musician, but he's a modern blues singer, just wonderful. And this past week, I had written the ceremony. I said, I've never listened to music by Gary Clark Jr. I don't have that within me. I have to open myself to what he has to offer me in the same way as he offered his music to my daughter and my son-in-law to find themselves again. So I listened to the music and I said, wonderful, I'm going to put some of his music in the part of the ceremony where I describe how they got back together. And people will feel the music in their own way, and hopefully everyone, or almost everyone, will see that this music makes you want to dance and makes you want to hold somebody close. That's from the outside. But I used it in a creative way to help everybody understand what my daughter and son-in-law went through. And then you set the environment. So my environment was, I want to write something that is the best possible. So that's the fear element too. I got to top myself. This has to be the best ceremony I ever wrote, or pretty much up there. So that's the fear element. But if I lent myself to their experience, their story, and gave myself to that, that's coming from the outside, using the tools that I have within me to filter that into something that was creative and that everybody there, or almost everybody, can relate to and have a good experience and feel what they felt and go through what they felt. So it's a whole process that you have to commit yourself to. And fear is part of it.
Nick had his hand up here.
I hope I can say this succinctly. No man, no woman is an island. Picking up on what you said so beautifully, and Tim Zebo and a number of other people have said, it's a chemical process. This very meeting is a chemical process. The apt configuration is very clever and useful because we're all a bunch of apps, and we do communicate with one another. We do share with one another. We say something, I say something, you react. People are reacting right now chemically. It's all in the head. These apps are chemical interactions charged with electricity. Now, I think the emphasis has been, at least this is what I think, on the origination of a creative act as being solipsistic. Me and me alone. I originated it. I created it. Here it is, full blown. That is not the way life is. We are social creatures. We are sharing this moment in a very chemical way.
I did not plagiarize that speech that I wrote.
Okay, so basically I'm saying my little creative act over the last week was a collaboration in writing a letter to an editor. And you'll probably see it in today's Asbury Park Press, Pat Barr. Now, she showed me a previously published letter from Reverend Shaw. And chemically, I reacted to the point where I grabbed paper and pencil. There's the paper and pencil I'm always chasing. And it just flowed. But it was a chemical reaction. It took his chemistry, my confusions and disagreements and partial agreement that produced a letter. It was a collaboration, as I said, with Pat Barr. However, I was not aware of its happening. I was just doing it. So chemistry is always at work in the brain and among other chemical people.
All right, we have time for two more. Rosemary?
I don't believe my brain is an app, first of all. I kind of see the direction that people are going with that. I think our brains are, I think apps were maybe created after our brain. I don't think our brain is created after an app. But what I originally wanted to say was regarding the film, the author expresses the feeling of something going through her. And right now I am reading a Carole King biography, A Natural Woman, and she says the very same thing, that she has two ways of writing. One is to write, to sit down and write and collaborate with somebody and come up with something. And the other is when something just comes through her and she uses those very words. And I think that is a very common thing that happens with creative people. Hundreds of years ago, with composers, artists, performers, they all say the same thing. It comes through you.
Okay, one more. Can you get back there?
Sure.
Thank you. I'm thinking of creativity as inherently from the need to survive. So you could call it evolution maybe, because to survive we had to figure out how to make a fire, how to build a house. And I think the creativity of those types of things are basically in our genes. And it goes back to thousands of years. It's just a thought. That's my thought. So I think creativity is just, it's innate because I think it is part of our survival. So you can say evolution or just our genes, but genes go back to the very beginning.
Thank you all for your comments. We need to kind of head toward the end here. I would like to add something that I've learned, that the joy is in the doing. After I learned that, years later, I discovered, of course, Shakespeare knew that as well. Maybe I read it once, although I really don't know the play Troilus and Cressida. I've never seen it. I've never done it. I've never read it. All the others, many of the others, I've been in 12 Shakespearean plays, but I am by no means a Shakespeare scholar. But I found this: things won are done. Joy's soul lies in the doing. Joy is in the doing, and I try to share that with younger people, that, you know, if you're doing this because you want to make $1 million from this, or the end game is what you're after, I have to explain, no. The joy is in the doing. It's in the creative process. It's like when you play music, when you get into that, you love it. If you're into it, that's where the joy comes from. Or painting, or when I'm editing video, I can sit there for 8 hours straight, except for bathroom breaks. And I can just focus. I just love it. I get in the groove, and the joy is in the doing. How creativity can give meaning to life. Although we don't believe in life after death, there's still a desire in us to somehow live beyond our natural years. We want to last. We want to be remembered. Here's a quote that says it. It's from a guy named, I never heard of him before until I found this quote, Rollo May, existential psychologist associated with humanistic psychology and existential philosophy. That's a lot to say. Creativity is not merely the innocent spontaneity of our youth and childhood. It must also be married to the passion of the adult human being, which is a passion to live beyond one's death. We want to leave something. We want to be remembered for something. That's one reason why we make things. We want to create something that will last beyond us. That's one way it gives meaning to life. But that doesn't have to be the goal. Sometimes our goal is to make a present for someone. Sometimes it might be out of necessity that we create. We need to make something because we actually need to use it. Or we make things because we simply love the process. They love the way it makes us feel. We love the way it makes us feel while we're working on it. And best of all, we love to look at the finished product, whatever it is, and wallow around in the satisfaction of creation. I made that. I created that. That's fun. I keep looking back at the video that I just shot, and it's on YouTube, of my piano player friend in New York, jazz pianist. And I think there are 58 views now on YouTube. Probably 12 of them are mine. I just look back and I go, gosh, that was great. We did, Here's a quote from a blog by a guy named Juan Blia. Creating is a fountainhead of freedom and expression of all that's good and strong and beautiful in all of humanity. I think creativity is a magic power within humans. It's better than a magic wand. We summon our creativity in a million ways every day, but especially we use our creativity to give meaning to our lives. We use it in all the ways that we, quote, affirm our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good of humanity. So these are a few ways creativity can give meaning to our lives. Quote, you must not for one instant give up the effort to build new lives for yourselves. Creativity means to push open the heavy, groaning doorway to life. Some of us will be going to lunch now, so we can continue to discuss humanism and or to just meet a new friend. The map to the restaurant is on your program. So now we'll close with a prayer. Of course, this is not a real prayer. This is by Kurt Vonnegut from the Sirens of Titan. The prayer of the Reverend C. Horner Redwine. O Lord, most high creator of the cosmos, spinning in galaxies, soul of electromagnetic waves, inhaler and exhaler of inconceivable volumes of vacuum, spitter of fire, rock, trifler with millennia. What could we do for thee that thou couldst not do for thyself 1 octillion times better? Nothing. What could we do or say that could possibly interest thee? Nothing. O mankind, rejoice in the apathy of our Creator, for it makes us free and truthful and dignified at last. No longer can a fool point to a ridiculous accident of good luck and say, somebody up there likes me? And no longer can a tyrant say, God wants this or that to happen, and anyone who doesn't help this or that happen is against God. O Lord, Most High, what a glorious weapon is thy apathy. For we have unsheathed it, have thrust and slashed mightily with it, and the claptrap that has so often enslaved us or driven us into the madhouse lies slain. Amen. Thanks for coming. Thank you for listening to the Red Bank Humanists podcast. For more information, visit redbankhumanists.org or follow us on Twitter @RedBankHumanists.